HIV and AIDS remains the leading cause of death among Africans aged between 10 and 19. The statement by UNICEF comes at the start of the major international conference on the virus. It begins in Durban today. The conference will be opened by UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon. It will be attended by an estimated 18,000 delegates who will be assessing progress made in the fight against the epidemic. Yesterday, Health Minister Aaron Motsoaledi launched a coalition against tuberculosis. The coalition, with the Red Cross, National TB Association and religious organizations, is part of global efforts to end the epidemic by 2030. TB accounts for 80% of HIV and AIDS deaths in the country. Meanwhile, government has given the assurance that it has done everything possible to ensure the safety of delegates at the conference. Now, to talk to us more about this, let's go over to Eben.
Yes, it is the 21st International AIDS Conference. There are conversations being had right now about a vaccine for the dreaded disease within our own lifetimes. Will that be a discussion point? Well, we're expecting to be live sometime around 11 o'clock this morning, after 11. But let's go to Blaine in Durban. A very good morning to you, Blaine.
Thank you very much. Yeah, we at the 21st International AIDS Conference right here in Durban. Now, over 6 million people in South Africa are living with HIV and AIDS. Now, this is about 11% of the population, but there is a certain vulnerable group that health officials are really concerned about. This is females and young women between the ages of 15 and 24. Now, if we look at some of the stats, UNAIDS say that about 2,500 women in this category are actually getting infected almost every week, and this is really, really alarming for health officials. What is being done? Let's further this conversation now. Professor Salim Abdul Karim joins me now live. Thank you very much indeed for your time. Professor is the director at Center for AIDS Program of Research in South Africa, or CRPRISA. Sobering statistics, isn't it? How concerned are you?
Absolutely. When we think back to the situation in 2000 when we came to this conference, we were talking about treatment as the big challenge. And when we think now, 16 years later, when treatment is being rolled out and we still need to continue that effort, the real challenge we have now is to prevent new HIV infections. Now, Southern and Eastern Africa account for the vast majority of HIV infections in the world, about 70%. And within these countries, young women, they have a disproportionate burden of HIV, incredibly high rates of HIV.
And this is what we're talking about, 4 times more than the male counterparts.
Absolutely. So in some countries it goes even as high as 8 times more. In South Africa it's about 3 to 4 times higher in young women compared to young men.
So I guess the question is, what is being done?
So the first, of course, is that we need to better understand this. We need to understand what are the underlying factors that drive this HIV epidemic in these young women. And there have been many different studies that have looked at this issue, and essentially one of the key challenges is to understand why the high exposure to HIV. Well, from studies we've done and others have done, we now better understand that it's the age disparity. It is that young women are sleeping with older men. So when they do that, they are then sleeping with individuals who have high virus load in their blood, and these are, in that group, men, a lot of the men, a high prevalence, as we say, a high prevalence of HIV exists in those men. So that's why we get this high transmission rate to these young women. So when these young women then get pregnant and they grow up, they then have very high rates of HIV infection, and that's what's causing this burden in this country.
So intergenerational sex is being discouraged at all levels.
Yeah, I mean, when we think about, a 17-year-old, acquiring HIV from a 30-year-old man, I mean, that really shouldn't be happening. In a society, we should ensure that we put in place the social norms that discourage this kind of behavior from both men and women.
What is needed in terms from health officials, from civil society, in order to create more awareness to this particular age group?
So I think one of the challenges is that we haven't totally ensured that we give women the power to control their risk of HIV infection. All of the tools that we have, the HIV prevent, whether it's condoms or circumcision or education, much of that is dependent on male agreement. We do not have technologies readily available for women. So now, in about September last year, the World Health Organization, in their new guidelines, are promoting taking a single tablet a day as an approach to empowering women to protect themselves. The challenge is that it's not easy to do.
Yeah.
And right now, that's what's being experimented on. How do we do this? How do we provide this? And we anticipate that in a short while, that will become the way in which we'll protect young women.
Are we talking about PrEP here?
We are talking about pre-exposure prophylaxis PrEP.
Yeah. I know it's approved, the FDA has approved that. What about South Africa? What's South Africa's approach to it?
So the Medicines Control Council has approved the use of Truvada, a combination of tenofovir and emtricitabine, for use as PrEP. Now, the government has already introduced PrEP for two groups, sex workers and men who have sex with men. The next step is for them to introduce it to all young women and all women and all people, actually, not just women, but all people at high risk, which is what the World Health Organization has recommended. The World Health Organization, in their recommendations and guidelines, say that PrEP should be provided to all individuals who are at high risk because they could benefit from it. And our government's ability to do that will be dependent on first procuring adequate amounts of drugs and so on. And once that's in place, then they can look at wide-scale implementation.
Professor, let's talk about targets. We want to end this epidemic by 2030. Can that be done?
It's a tall order. I don't think anybody believes that this is just going to happen because we say so. It's going to need a lot of hard work. So I think ending AIDS is a good aspirational goal. Whether it's actually achievable without a cure, without a vaccine, is debatable. And it's unlikely to be achievable. However, if we see ending AIDS as the long-term goal, and our intermediate goal of 2030 is to end AIDS as a public health threat, that I believe is doable.
Professor, thank you very much indeed for your time. I'm sure we'll talk through the course of this whole week. Thank you very much.
My pleasure,
indeed. Professor Salim Abdul Karim is the Director for the Center for AIDS Program Research here in South Africa, one of the foremost experts on this topic, HIV and AIDS. He's confident it can be ended. It'll take a lot of work to be done. It'll take a lot of money. The UNAIDS has said that it'll take around $26 billion annually till 2020, actually 2020, to end it by 2030. So yeah, you see, that's what the 18,000 delegates are working on right here. For now, it's back to studio.